So let's kick this off, guys. Thanks for coming, everyone. I think just to kick it off, I think my general thought today was, looking forward. I had a very good discussion after last meeting with a couple folks about longevity of the council. How can we make sure that what we're doing isn't sort of circular? I know some people had a little bit of a concern with that. And I've had some discussions with the governor, and he would like us to go in this direction as well, just because of the fact that, if you look at New Hampshire and you look at sort of the task that we're up against, having a concrete idea of how we operate and setting that a little bit more in stone, not to the part where, you can't move left and right and you don't have some flexibility, but just some very basic things, and maybe broadening the team who sort of carries the weight a little bit. So, maybe creating a secretary position or a director of programming, because that's something we're going to get big on, or at least that's what it seemed like last meeting. So just try to build a system for the long term, and try to build a system for a big effort rather than just, the 25 people in the room. Not saying that you're all great, not great, but you get what I'm saying. So minutes are on the backside of the agenda. It's fairly simple. Last meeting, we opened at around 6:10. Minutes from before was approved. I kind of gave a little overview of the council's past actions. And framework for the meeting's discussion was really talking about how can we maximize our outreach, how can we maximize our time, and how can we use these meetings and other opportunities to sort of build and gather information that will then go into our next report in September. And sort of how can we strategically, even though we're just 25 people out of all millennials in New Hampshire, how can we use our connections and our opportunities to get the most information or the correct information and put that together in a way that makes sense. I think that's a good summary there. And then, I think it's pretty straightforward. And besides that, we obviously had Beth there from Stay Work Play. I know a couple of people weren't here last meeting. I know you all can read, but, and that was pretty much it. If there's anything else, I'll take an amendment. If not, I'll look for someone to make a motion to approve.
I would move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second? Perfect. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All against? No abstentions? Perfect, that passes, that's great. So let's dive into it. I think that before we get into sort of bylaw and goals, I think we need to really, and Jess made this point last year, I think, talking about a mission statement, and talking about, let's put into a couple sentences, what are we trying to do here? And that's a little bit why I put the executive order, or printed the executive order for today, because I think most of what that's going to entail is already in that. It might need to be a little bit reworded. We don't need whereases, but you know where I'm going with this. So if anyone has any ideas, I'd love to really, start putting a draft together, and maybe, if we want to do 10, 15 minutes on this, not to spend too much time, and if a couple people want to take it back and sort of work on that more, if we can come to
do we have a large,
definite spot.
An easel or something that we can write, like a board?
I might have one. Let me look. I do.
Yeah.
I'm Wilma Venture. I'm representing Hillsborough County. I own Grass Escape.
I'm Lisa in Hillsborough County as well, and out of Nashville. Brianna Marceau, Greater Concord Chamber of Commerce in Merrimack County.
Connie Lindis, owner of Machina Arts, and Cheshire County.
George Hansel, owner of Philippine Manufacturing, and Keene City Council, Cheshire County.
Carol LaSalle, I'm representing Belknap County. I work for the Lakes Region Community Developers.
I'm Carolyn Leary, Vice President of the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce in Hillsborough County.
I'm Adam Lord. I'm a CPA with Pinchansky & Company in the Manchester area.
Dan Gray, representing Merrimack County, and I work for Eastern Bay.
Austin Bernier, Carroll County, Randolph Mountain Club.
Jesse Wright from Carroll County.
Kwame Ohinyadu, Grafton County, work with Fresher Spencer and Lebanon.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Adam, do you want to write it, or do you want to?
Yeah, my writing is the equivalent of a 7-year-old, so as long as you can bear with me.
Don't worry, I'm a lefty. It doesn't get worse than me. Okay. How, I would suggest maybe doing, if you have a phrase, we can start doing phrases, or if we want to do some core concepts, we can start with that and build up from it. Whatever works for everyone, really.
Hi everyone, sorry I'm late.
No worries.
This is Ethan.
Hey, Ethan. So, Ethan, we're talking about right now about drafting a mission statement for the council, sort of as the foundation of today's discussion about creating a system and building a system with bylaws and other things and concrete goals to ensure the longevity of the council and sort of make the council's operations not just smoother, but also able for us to scale them from, just this kind of meeting here to, auxiliary events and whatnot.
Great.
So if we start off with the goals aspect, it would be probably be easier if we all did this together instead of breaking up into different groups. Do you guys agree?
I think a really nice place to start might be if we look at number 1. The council shall provide recommendations, insights, suggestions, and feedback to the governor on matters New Hampshire state policy that directly impact the attraction and retention of young workers. And that is it's a broad enough statement and kind of gets down to the meat of what our goals are.
Yeah.
I also like that the keywords in there of attract and retain are, they're action items.
Yep.
And they're certainly things that we can build upon and make our work then very mission centric.
Not exactly stable, huh? Just cut the council and put the governor's Millennial Advisory Council. What do you guys think?
No, I agree. When I was reading over this, and thank you, Alex, for bringing this today. That kind of encompasses, I think the next step would be to discuss a little bit further about how we gather the information. Luckily, we've been doing that together for the past several months, but maybe having a little bit more focus about how we want to do that this year. And again, I apologize I wasn't here at the last meeting. I know you guys did discuss some of that activity. It sounds like doing some sort of programs around the state. That sounds like an excellent first step.
So do you think we maybe should include in this, maybe in a different sentence, a caveat in terms of, how we're going to do this? And it could be a broad stroke, to the effect of something that we put in the disclaimer in the annual report. Not just only saying, something to the effect of the council will use its own opinions, experiences, and strategic outreach to millennials across the state or something like that.
Yep.
So it would be how are we going to do it is going to be through active community and corporate involvement.
I was going to say engagement, but
Engagement.
Engagement and outreach.
Are we working on, this is a mission statement or a
Yeah.
goals document?
a mission statement.
Because a mission statement, you really want to be really high level, not to put yourself in a box. We can come out with strategic goals, so that would be more of a living document.
Yeah, and I think also that's a later step. So maybe let's, as I said before, let's try to boil it down to 2 or 3 sentences, whatever everyone wants. Yeah. So go back to Jess's idea, because I think that's a great, almost perfect suggestion, is to use number 1 and just say the Governor's Millennial Advisory Council started there.
Aims to provide.
Yeah. Aim. Do you want to just flip it?
Yeah.
You can just start writing.
All right. So we're cutting it down little by little.
Yeah, so let's,
So we want to have it be mission statement again?
yes. And let's do the Governor's Millennial Advisory Council.
One of the main points in this that I really liked was the recognition that, it says young New Hampshire workers, but young Greenwich staters continue to be underrepresented in the state legislature. I see that as if we could reword that in part of the mission statement. That's an important point that I use to sort of describe what this body is to other people.
Yeah.
Another important part is that we're acting as a representation for our peers, so it's not just working in a vacuum, we're actually going out and talking to people and bringing it back and making sure that it's not our own personal goals and biases, but we're actually working on part of our community members.
How do you think we bring sort of the point in the fourth whereas, which is, goes to your point, and squared with sort of the almost pre-existing structure of that first point, and sort of include in it what you said in a little bit of this combined discussion of the methodology? Because I don't think any of that puts us in a box. I think that's just very fundamental.
Just like encourage involvement in general, and then include things such as, getting involved in a legislative way, or just communicating, more of a broad way to phrase it.
Yeah, yeah.
So again, we don't want to put ourselves in that box if we're just looking for people to get involved in legislature, et cetera.
Yeah. No, I think that's great.
Something about soliciting the viewpoints and ideas from youth around the state and contribute to representing them in the state government or something. I know that those can be combined in some way.
Yeah, it's like
It's just a matter of
we
words.
gather and deliver are the two. So we're going to gather the
Right.
feedback from the millennial constituents of whatever that, however we want to phrase it. And our responsibility is to then provide that feedback directly to the governor on that constituent's behalf. So it's a twofold process. I don't know if that's really not a mission statement still, to your point. This, I know I'm very how focused. I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm just being too simple here. So I feel like the mission statement is exactly what you just read off the sheet. Like, can we just move on from that? Or is that not addressing?
Are there any words we're not including between provide and?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, we can finesse that, but I think that's a pretty solid foundation.
Yeah, I definitely think, I like the idea of including the idea, a variation of that fourth whereas.
Something about giving a voice to millennials because they're underrepresented?
Yeah, or something to the effect of that and the combination of the importance it plays in the future. And then, the demographic challenge we're facing, or something to that effect.
What about, to the end of increasing representation of millennials in Granite State politics, the council shall gather information and feedback from local communities and use this to provide feedback, suggestions, and recommendations to the governor that directly impact the attraction and retention of young workers. Something to that. And just kind of,
I like the direction.
Spitballed it, but I kind of feel like it's at least woven, if albeit roughly.
It needs to be logical.
Yeah.
But doesn't that make the final goal really just
To keep
locked
it,
into more of the representation as opposed to the retention and attraction?
what if we take off the ending part of it and just leave it as provide recommendations, insights, suggestions, and feedback on matters of state policy as it pertains to millennials? And then as we start, we can change it as we go along, so that way we're not gonna, because if we put all the goals or strategy inside the mission statement, it's gonna be too bulky.
I think
And
retention
eventually,
and attraction is important, though.
I would agree.
I think especially as we hear all the time that the biggest issue is our aging workforce, and we have to attract and retain young professionals and find opportunities for them, whether it's in their communities or in the legislature. So I personally think that those words are really important and, again, actionable, so they're things that we can build upon.
If we just add the word encourage involvement, just add encourage involvement somewhere in that sentence. Because it's really all that's lacking. You know, we're talking about insight, suggestions, and feedback. We're not really saying like how are we going to actually acquire this. You know, just encouraging people to get involved. We can leave that very blanketed.
One other way to perhaps include the engagement part that you were talking about is to change this to impact the attraction and engagement of young. I kind of have a hard time with the word workers, but not
yeah, because
strong
it's not
with
just
slow.
workers, we're talking education, housing.
And not everybody works for various reasons. Anyways, I think engagement kind of is a nice way to address the things that you're talking about.
I wonder if we can do this because I know my organization had, and sorry, I'm researching, so I'm not blindly leading us. We can have a mission and a vision statement that complement one another, because I feel like we're trying to do too much in one. And so mission is just a very statement based of the purpose, and a vision can be exactly what we want to intend to do, like giving representation, given that young New Hampshire workers are underrepresented in our state legislature. So we could, instead of trying to hobble together one big mission, we could simplify the mission and have the vision be some of the whereas pieces that we're trying to include.
So essentially polish the first bullet.
Yeah, like I feel like still the mission is that
Yeah.
sentence that we have identified in number one,
Yeah.
and then our vision can be the nice, pulling together some of those whereas statements.
Sounds great. That works for everyone. I like the snaps.
For the time being, I'll hold off on standing up here
Yeah.
until we actually meet. And then once we start getting into the strategies and other things that require group stuff, then we'll
Definitely.
get at it.
So just, could you reiterate what you were saying earlier? I kind of got lost a little bit.
Sure.
I know you were talking about sort of your opinions on you saying young workers, and then there was something about directly impacting that you were saying about that phrasing.
So I think my point about the word workers is just that it's a little bit, I would probably change that for young people.
Okay.
And then I can't remember what I was saying about directly impact the attraction and engagement of young people. It sounds kind of clunky now that I say it out loud again, but somehow getting into them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but thinking about the longevity of things as
Yeah,
whatever
as a
the next
shelf
people are, Gen
Mhm.
Xers.
No.
Z's.
Gen Zs.
Zs.
iGen.
Oh, Z? That's what
Yeah.
you call it? I like iGen. That's what I call it. Tell me.
Rather than striking retention out, could be keep attraction, retention, and engagement.
It's a great idea.
That works for everyone. That works for me.
So then it would read, the council aims to provide recommendations, insights, suggestions, and feedback to the governor on matters of New Hampshire state policy that directly impact the attraction, retention, and engagement of young people.
Could we maybe do it to say the Governor's Millennial Advisory Council
Yep.
shall provide recommendations, insights, suggestions, and feedback? And then go on from there?
Or the mission of the council is to provide. And it's,
Do you think that's redundant because it is sort of under the promises of being a mission statement?
I don't think it matters too much.
Yeah, I
If
don't
it's
think
mission
it's a
big
statement colon or
Yeah.
Yeah.
this. Well, I can make a motion to
Sure.
adopt this, the sentence that I said out loud before, so I don't have to say it again, as the Millennial Advisory Council's official mission.
Is that okay?
Is there any discussion on that? Do you want me to read it before?
Yeah.
The Governor's Millennial Advisory Council shall provide recommendations, insights, suggestions, and feedback to the Governor on matters in New Hampshire state policy that directly impact the attraction, retention, and engagement of young people.
Are we doing
Attraction,
shall or
retention.
aims to? Are we keeping shall or are we doing aims to provide?
I was under the impression we'd keep them
Keep the
shall, unless there's strong opposition to it.
We are going to.
Missions are usually to do something, so you should be, the governor's millennial council, not shall, to will provide.
And I'm a little anxious to shy away from the power and the sentiment of
Shall.
the executive order just because it is our foundation.
Do you feel like that we need a sense of place at the end of this sentence? I know it says matters of New Hampshire state policy already, but it feels a little bit like your retention of young workers in the state, or,
Young people.
I don't know.
How about we do this?
Something.
On matters, and then you strike New Hampshire in that instance, just say matters of state policy, and at the end you say other New Hampshire in the Granite State.
Great.
Do you have a preference? Does anyone have a preference? New Hampshire?
603. I think the governor likes that.
It does. Hashtag 603 Pride.
It's a mission statement, hashtag 603 Pride.
Hey, if that's what everyone wants, I can't do anything about it.
Pictures and.
They stop reading right there.
As long as it's not a picture of avocado toast, I think we're fine. So just to get this straight, so right now I have the Governor's Millennial Advisory Council shall provide recommendations, insights, suggestions, and feedback to the governors on a matter of state policy that directly impact the attraction, retention, and engagement of young people in New Hampshire.
Good.
Perfect. So everyone in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All against? Any abstentions? No? Perfect. So that passes. That's great. Sweet. Feel a little bit like we're back in student government for you guys that did that, but it's okay. So here's my question. Do you guys think it would be more logical for us to pull the discussion of goals before the bylaws? Or do you think we need to establish I'm sort of clumping the officers with the bylaw discussion, or do you think we need to put structure up, general structure up, discuss that first? It's a very philosophical question, I guess. What came first?
Bylaws should be provided.
Bylaws should be fine.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I guess this is my thought. Right now, I think we need a couple additional officers. And I think those can be very much elected by the council if we want that. And I think we need like a vice chair, for lack of a better term, or whatever we want to call it. And we probably need at least a secretary, for lack of a better term. I don't like that term very much, but, and then if we do want to go into the long-term, we have meetings here, but we also have events, do we want to go in the direction of we have someone who coordinates that? And we might decide now that we don't need it, just because we're not there yet, and we can add it later, or we might decide that we want it now. But I guess that's my question sort of to the group at the get-go is, how do we feel about that premises?
I will say putting programs on one person is
A
a
lot.
lot, so
Yeah.
I would actually advocate for a subgroup of people, at
Okay.
least 3. Just from chamber, I'm sure you can back up on that chamber experience, that's a lot to put on one person.
Yeah.
So.
It feels like they might be just that there could be one coordinator though.
Sure.
Or someone to
One
organize
person.
a calendar and keep us all informed of what's going on.
Yeah.
And then,
Delegate tasks.
Yeah.
So my question, I like that, because I think, to your point, you would have 3 people, especially if you think about it this way. Last time we discussed having each county or city, not to exclude people, but have like an event, like a business tour or a listening session or a roundtable, or we've had like a list of 12. And so if you have if we're operating on the premise that those 2 people from that city or county are putting that on and organizing that, if you then add this one person who essentially, as you said, puts together the schedule, I think you have the team of 3.
Sure. That makes sense.
Now, do I think you might be in the position where that one person has still a lot of work to do? I think so. But I also think you might be able to bounce it off to, whatever other person in that officer
Right.
position, for lack of a better term.
I think we'll just want to clearly define the roles of, if you're the host county, then these are your obligations. You gotta find the location and work with your local chambers and other young professional networks to get the word out, but then it's on the role of that one director of programs to do all the like logistical stuff.
So are we in the spot where we want to say we want to establish in the bylaws vice chair, secretary, and programming? Or what do we want to do? Do we want to do that at all?
What are the responsibilities?
Yeah.
Well, I think that's something we need to hash out. I think that needs to be very clearly hashed
Are
out.
you looking for a vice chair to run a meeting if you can't make a meeting?
For example.
And help hammer out the agenda?
Yes, so I think, so for one, I think right now it's already at the point where it's a lot for me to just square as one person. And I think it's gonna get only more intense. And I think it's in all our best interest if we spread out the work.
So somebody to work in tandem with you to basically just keep doing what you've been doing.
And increase it.
And increase it.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is our social media platform?
Right now, the only discussion I've had besides this right now was with Sean, who works in that industry and was very interested in it. And here's the thing, I think at the end of the day, if we are agreeing with the baseline of we all think we need these 3 officers in addition to the chair that's already in the executive order, then I think the discussion will have to be had is that a responsibility of the chair and vice chair? Is it a little bit of the programming guy or girl? Depending on if it's program related or not. And I think it's just something that kind of squarely falls under a different categories. At least that's my thought. If there's disagreement on that, I think we can hash that out. So how about we do this? How about we either disagree or we vote yes or no on those 3? And then we can go into hashing it out of what is the responsibility of it. Does that work for everyone?
And how do we pick who they are? How do we let them?
The method, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And how long is it going to be for? So how about this? So could we do just yes or no if you're in favor of doing a vice chair, a secretary, and a director of programming? So in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All against, please say no or nay. Good. Perfect. So if we got that. So how would you guys like to do this? Do you want it go sort of line by line on each and say this person needs to do that, this person needs to do that, and then sort of once you have one done, move on to the other?
Yeah.
Does that work? Okay, so let's start at the top, I guess. So from a very basic vice chair position, philosophically, I think this is a very philosophical discussion, a little bit of a practical one too, operational. I think you need someone as a vice chair that is part of the voice of the council. Obviously, everyone on part of it has its own voice and speaks for Manchester or Coas or whatever it is. But I think that's sort of one of the pivotal pillars of that position is being sort of a face of the franchise, for lack of a better term.
A spokesperson.
Correct. And the other one is being sort of the de facto number 2 you know, my car crashes on the off chance that we're not gonna be in Concord.
Now, Alex, given you're saying that basically there are tasks that you're doing currently that you just want to automatically delegate to this person.
I think the coordination of meetings and maybe doing a little bit of the housekeeping items. That's, you know, the agenda could be one of them. And then, or that could be something of a shared responsibility between a secretary, a vice chair, and chair, or, because you want to have the minutes from the secretary, you want to have whatever anyone sends, and then that sort of comes together. I'm looking around to not be the only one carrying the conversation.
Should we talk about what, like, the chair's role is, too?
Sure.
Like, versus the vice chair, maybe, so that you can define that a little bit?
Sure, yeah, what do you want,
I mean, just so that that person knows, like, your responsibilities versus their responsibilities.
sure, do you want to include that in the bylaws, is that what you're saying? Or just in general?
Yeah, I mean, it might be good to,
Mm.
I mean, I feel like whenever I work with a client, the first thing I do is sit down and say, this is what your responsibilities are, this is what I'm responsible for. And then in that case, because then wires get crossed, people do work over again, so.
Okay.
Or no one does it at all, one of the two.
The proverbial gap, yeah.
So right now, and obviously it's set to increase as we do listening sessions or whatever direction this takes, obviously what the chair and ideally the vice chair is going to change and grow, right? But right now, basically you are sending out emails, setting up the meetings, doing the minutes, right? All the, kind of
Talking to
what is-
people and-
Right, so
yeah.
like those are all bullet points,
Yeah.
right? And so, I mean, some of that you can parse out and say, all right, I still want to do this piece. Vice chair would like to take over this piece.
Yeah.
And the rest is kind of, depends on the direction of where you
Yeah.
go in the next several months.
So,
But-
would you agree that in a general aspect, they really should be broad? They should cover basic things, but they should be broad to have that
I
flexibility.
agree that they should be broad.
Yeah.
I think one really important thing that we should assign to somebody is to be the general point person for the group as a 25-person council. Are we 25?
25.
I have an idea about the agenda, and I'm gonna email Alex today. Like having a go-to person to be the kind of general cat herder is gonna be important. At least for me to be like, if I have this question, I know who to ask. Or I would like to bring this up, and I want to email someone. So chair as number one cat herder, I guess, could be a.
I think that's the way probably to go. Just looking at back on the executive order. Just because if it's me, now it's me, but say in 2 years from now, or not even 2 years, what, a couple months from now. I'm not usually someone who knocks on wood. I don't believe in this stuff, but that was awfully aggressive, so I'm gonna knock.
You said it.
I'm kidding. But just because of the fact that the chair is really appointed by the governor's office, I think having them be the point person and being sort of the liaison to the governor's office in one way or another, even if they're not staff anymore, I think is the way to go.
Yeah.
And then, so I think that's the point. I think the chair's the point person, but I think for operational things of trying to get stuff going, it's the vice chair.
So we would say we want this on the agenda. You think if it actually is going to be something that is important to the council with if the governor's like, it's in his mind, and then you're going to tell the vice chair, hey, add this to the agenda.
Yeah.
You're going to take care of one keeping.
I think that's the way to go. I think that makes most sense operationally. Okay, let me write this down. And then, so my hope is that, to be frank, because I'm looking at time too, I think we're going to get to a point where we all have a very basic idea where we need to be. And sort of, we have the mission statement now. We're going to have a pretty good idea with the officers. And I'd like to get to maybe to the point where we also say, okay, the agenda needs to be out on this time and have a little bit more structure with that. And as with anyone around this table, your workload changes, and so having more people, I think, that will improve that process. And I think that addresses everyone's concerns with that.
I think it would be really nice too to have a regularly recurring meeting.
I agree.
Everybody has different schedules, and not all 25 of us are gonna be able to come on the same day, but if we could figure out how to somehow get into a groove on this thing, and then it's gonna change, obviously, with us going to different counties and events, but
Yeah.
to have something at least as a placeholder would, I think, make consistency a little easier.
So, shall we dive back into it? So, as an overarching word, do we want to say the vice chair is really in charge of operations? Is that a wrong way to put it? Internal operations?
Yeah, that's good.
What else do you think we should add?
Whose responsibility is it to give an official press release?
The secretary write it and approval by the chair.
That
I
sounds.
think it should be the chair.
I have a question to everyone on that one. I very much think that on things like the annual report, that's something where we all come together and have agreements on it. Mechanically, how is it going to work if, say, the House passes, I don't know, housing legislation that it squares with our annual report? How is that going to work? So would we just have the officer say, yep, this looks good, and we're going to send a press release? Or do we come together as a group and say, awesome, let's send it? What did you think? Or do we not engage in that kind of thing?
I think we have to engage in that kind of thing, for sure.
It should be a the chair would end up communicating the boards, either majority yes or no, as far as, so if something comes out and one of us wants something to go into the press about it and they say, hey, we should end up commenting on this, or we should, focus on these things, if a majority.
It's gonna be way too cumbersome to do it on a issue by issue basis. It's gonna be up to the officers as a group to basically take the annual report or whatever official document we have, and they're gonna make an executive decision on what to comment on that. And and the statement is going to be, this is either in agreement with the adopted annual report of this group, or it's not.
And maybe we come up with boilerplate language that says not this press release does not mean that every single person in our group agrees with our statement. It's just that our generally agrees or disagrees with what we've come up with and agreed on and voted as our report.
I also think that's part of the reason we just voted on mission statement. And if it's a piece of policy or legislation that aligns with our mission statement, which has guided our reports and other documents, then we all sort of need to understand that there might be some things that we don't necessarily personally agree with, but as a member of the council who has adopted this mission statement, if it's something related to our mission, then it's important that we recognize that. And I also think, sort of a side note to this conversation, that we are, we're advocating on behalf of millennials, and we're not necessarily taking policy stances, because I think those are two very different things. And we can advocate all we want on different issues and provide an opportunity for people to use this as a sounding board and kind of speak as the experts on millennial issues, but we don't necessarily need to be agreeing for or against a policy. And if we do, it should be something that clearly aligns with our mission.
So where are we at with that? Is it really just, as you said, the executive board, is that sort of the majority opinion on this, or do we not do it? I think we should do to some degree. I don't think we should swear on every little, every little change to, a comma or an Oxford comma that's being made in a piece of legislation. But I think that there is an appropriate amount.
Yeah. I think an executive board is probably the way to go.
Part of their duty is going to be just to continue the voice that we have in the council on all of the items that we've already put together.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So, are we good on the role of the vice chair? Do we want to move on, or do you have
I just want
anything
to go
else,
back
Jess?
to Adam's point of who's, like, I don't think we have a final answer on who's crafting, which of the officers has a responsibility to craft responses.
What do you think it should be?
I don't know. I mean, I think personally it should be someone who's most passionate about the issue, or has the most clear understanding. So perhaps it's, you decide on a case-by-case basis in the executive committee or whatever we're calling it. But that can get muddy.
Yeah, the only releases that I see the group doing are gonna be related
Events.
to adopted documents or discussions that we've had. So it's really, it's not you don't have to be an expert in it to relate whatever's happening to something that's been adopted by the group. Because you're not speaking for yourself, you're speaking for whatever the consensus of the group has been.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking that if, we were commenting on something related to tax law for millennials, that I would certainly not want to do it when Adam would be better at it, or Amanda, who's also a CPA. But
Yeah.
you're probably right.
What about this string of thought? We put it in the, to speak in boxes, we put it in the box of, we're on the shoulders of the executive board, or officers, or whatever. Insert random thing here. But I think the responsible thing for anyone in that position to do is call, or talk to whoever that is. And sometimes, I foresee it sometimes not even being anyone who's sitting at the table.
Right.
To remain valid, we all have seen instances where the opportunity to say something can pass by very quickly. So if something ends up getting brought up where we say, listen, our next meeting isn't until the middle of the month, this is at the beginning of the month, it would behoove us to make a decision to come up with a statement on such and such sooner than later. So what if we were to implement a policy or a procedure where if something wants to get recognized by the council, then we end up submitting it to someone on the executive board, like the chair, the vice chair, the secretary, or the program director, and then they can in turn communicate to the other members of the executive board, and then they can make that determination. But the procedure would end up being, as council members, we communicate to the program director. The director will be our kind of liaison between us and the executive board is what we're ultimately gonna, I would think, just for a word to call it for the time being. So if the procedure would be we submit it to the program director has, an amount of time to.
I think that's a real operational question that is not necessarily like a baseline bylaws thing at this point. I think that it seems like we're all in agreement that it needs to be like an executive officer function.
But so that way nobody feels as if their concern is falling upon deaf ears.
No, but what I'm saying, Adam, is I think the ultimate decision of yes or no on it is an exec function.
Yes.
But anyone has the opportunity to take the incentive to say, hey, I think we should do this.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, however they feel is most appropriate to send to.
Yeah.
Did you have something that you wanted to say?
Can I offer a little input there?
Sure.
We're both from a nonprofit, so we go to councils and commissions and stuff like all the time. Typically, there are a variety of subcommittees. Like, for instance, you would have like a policy subcommittee who would craft your policy opinions, and you would meet more frequently than the full council does. And then there would be a communications subcommittee who does things like social media, and that would be who would craft your statement to the media based on the policies decided by the policy committees. They usually meet more frequently than the full councils, but that's just what usually happens.
We haven't wanted to interject, but there wasn't an opportunity to introduce ourselves. I'm Sarah Moore. I'm the Vice President of Community Engagement at New Futures. We're a health advocacy nonprofit who works to advocate, educate, and collaborate to improve the health and wellness of all New Hampshire residents. We formerly used to just do substance use disorder work, but we've expanded our mission in the past year, and now we also do things like child advocacy. I've worked with Brianna already. She's been a very friendly face to someone like myself who just relocated to Concord in December. I just came up from Boston and was very actively engaged in civic engagement for millennials for the city. So I offer myself as a resource to you both professionally and personally. And I'll be at the chamber, in fact, on Monday for another event that we're hosting there. So I'm not sure if you have representation from the nonprofit community here, But we're just getting ourselves up to speed. I will say that of an office of only 14, half of us are millennial age, and there's a great interest, at least from the communities that we work with, for any outreach efforts that you have, particularly policy that relates to millennials. We set up a phone bank for just one policy issue that's going to affect millennials greatly, and that's that for
1485. There's a bill right now going through the House, HB 1485, to allow landlords to charge 2 months' rent for a security deposit, which is.
So that's the kind of information that we have to offer you. We're taking notes for ourselves, but especially interested in workforce development opportunities. You're in the Granite State. I graduated from UNH and my master's at Northeastern. Mrs. Katie Foster is a community engagement coordinator in our office. So I have to leave early. I have a stack of cards. If you're Alex, the chair, though, I was doing. Is that?
Yeah. If you have a card, I'd love to chat.
Perfect. And we're also looking for representation from the council to our Millennial Prevention Council. We have about 15 attendees. There is not another meeting set up, but we wanted to
Substance use disorder prevention.
Well, thanks for coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for letting me interrupt you.
No,
I
it's
go to a lot of
okay.
meetings, a lot.
All the work that we do is coalition building on many different committees and commissions.
Never gets boring, right? Yeah, so to return to it, yeah.
I think we might be getting
need to
into
move
the
on.
weeds a little bit.
I agree.
So I think
Top
what
layer.
we're trying to accomplish right now is bylaws at the high level.
Correct.
Again, so everything that you ladies shared with us was extremely valuable. Thank you. But I think just staying right here and then deciding where our committees go at a perhaps later or
Yeah.
smaller groups might work better.
So how about this? How about we move on, very quickly touch about the last two positions, secretary and director programming, very quickly. Go into some key components of the bylaws. I have a feeling there's a couple people around the table who would be very interested in sort of crafting a more extensive version of it, and sort of building off our thoughts. And then we can have that sent out hopefully in the next week or two, and then have that be finalized by the next time. And so we have something very solid to work off of. So secretary, I think that's pretty straightforward. Records, minutes, that's really the main two that come to mind.
Do you think we should have at least something in the secretary's role or someone's of helping us to like keep track of legislation that might be of interest to the group? I know we had talked about that last time, but you know, if there's one of us that's really focused or interested in a specific policy, like having one person that keeps a list of that, I think would be critical as we think through different things we want to take a stance on. It seems natural for a secretary to do that,
Yeah,
obviously
we can
just
definitely do
as the person that like holds it and doesn't make decisions on it.
And I think too, goes to record keeping, it could be a collection.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It could be everyone says, hey, look at this one. You know, I know I look at legislation a lot, so.
Yeah.
Hey, look at this
It might also be a really good fit under a subcommittee role for environment, workforce housing,
Mhm.
where you have a smaller chunk of legislation that you're looking at. So I'm just gonna look at conservation and transportation legislation.
Yeah, that's a good
And I think it's a little bit easier to,
So of each of
Focus
the
on
4
that.
committees that we worked
Has
on
a-
for it, there's one person of contact that we can say, hey, this legislation came through related to environment, this one came through on workforce development, and then the person that's at that chair level
Yeah.
for the committee
Mhm.
would be able to at least dole it out.
It's a
to be-
it might be
multi-person
more
function.
manageable.
Yeah.
Definitely multi-function.
So I have a quick question.
Shoot, yeah.
We're talking about events.
Yes.
Do we need to start talking about, like a treasury type of a situation? Like, do we need like a treasurer? Like, how are we going to pay for these events?
Yes, that is you hit the crux of the problem with the events, which is the money.
Right.
Don't have any.
We don't have.
But we can get money.
I'm just saying, we just know, so do we need a treasurer function? Or are we
I-
just gonna find a way to make the event, situation?
No,
not
really easy role right
Where
now.
people are just
My,
paying?
my simple answer is, I don't think so. I don't
Okay, we
think.
can always adjust it later if we feel like that's
Correct.
something.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
If you hadn't noticed that we're a government body to some degree,
Right.
I think that made it very clear.
We're going to have to rely a lot on our fellow community members and other business owners and trying to see who's willing to help out, and maybe it means some, you know, they're getting a little promotion out of it or something, but I'm sure we can find a lot of people that will come help.
I think there's a very broad interest. I think that will serve us well. Going forward, Director of Programming, I think very quick, part of the executive officers. Responsible to work with this different people from both cities and committees, so council members from different cities or counties to help organize and coordinate and advertise to some degree the variety of events that the council has. Very broad strokes.
Yeah, just making sure we're all aware of the calendar, I think
Yeah.
would be the main function. You know, you don't want to put too much pressure on that one person, like you were saying earlier.
So, bylaws, besides that, I think a good one is sort of the idea of the meetings. That's a little bit of the monthly, this bullet point 2, the monthly meeting, in the executive order. I think that's sort of where you start with it.
Qualifications to be in it. You have to be born between 1980 and 2000.
Well, I think that, so in my vision, the executive order is below, is sort of our foundation, and the bylaws are the operational structure that we can change. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So I don't know if we need to specify membership in the bylaws if it's already specified in the executive order.
Gotcha.
Less paper.
The name of the council changes.
Yeah. I haven't heard anything, but if you have,
Yeah.
maybe.
No, I'm just saying, like, I mean, it's Millennial Council, but Millennial is like a generational thing, right? So once the age gap probably won't change.
Yeah.
But the description will.
Hi, Jen.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so conceptually, does anyone think we need to include anything else?
In the officer descriptions.
In the bylaws in general. My point was going to be election of officers.
And, you know, what does it take to vote for the council to vote yes on something, I think is pretty important. Are we majority, are we unanimous? Having some idea of what we think consensus means.
Okay, so do you have a thought? Sounds like you do. Okay. My initial knee-jerk reaction would be, say, election of officers is a simple majority, not a plurality, a majority. And so that would probably be, you know, if 3 people run, you probably have a runoff between the top 2, for example, if no one gets 50 plus 1%. And then from a policy perspective, for all of us to take a stance on one thing, I think the threshold needs to be higher. I think it needs to be at 2/3.
I agree.
So that's just my idea. I don't know if anyone else has anything to say. Cool. Pardon?
Exactly.
I think quorum is specified in the executive order, if I'm not mistaken, and I believe it's
A majority of all, number 6 on the back.
correct.
And do we consider present call-in and in person, or?
Yes, so I had a discussion with council about this, because I am, yes, that kind of a rule stickler. And they said it's really up to us what we want to deem. Okay, and I think considering the areas we all come from, I think phone is more than just necessary.
Yeah.
Okay. 2/3. Is there anything else?
The monthly meeting, do we have we're just gonna work that, leave that broad, it's just saying a monthly meeting, then we'll.
So here's my question. Do we want to stay in the rhythm of either the 3rd or the 4th week of the month?
I don't think there's any reason not to.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to switch up now, but.
It's also, I mean, we can all be here, but the people who aren't in the room are the people who might
Correct.
say that the 3rd or 4th week is not ideal for them.
Yeah. So I think you've emailed me about this, which is the idea of sending out a calendar till September 1st, which is when our next report is due. And sort of saying, leaving it open and putting days, and you can block days. Or we could say, hypothetically speaking, which day of the week works for you, if we'd rather do that. I don't know what everyone feels about that, but that's just my 2 strings of thought on that.
I think last meeting we had talked about the not in Concord community engagement meetings being in replace of or in addition to these meetings?
In addition to.
In addition to, okay.
Unfortunately, I think you need to square with the quorum rule. You know what I'm saying? So if,
Yeah.
so it doesn't.
Yep, absolutely.
I think to add to that, last time, we also talked about the thought that, saying Manchester is a faraway external event, I don't think makes a lot of sense. I think so saying like, if you go to Manchester, Bedford, Hooksett, whatever, within a certain parameter, I think you can square it with being essentially a Concord meeting. Not to put levels to towns, but from a theory perspective.
Yep.
What works best for everyone? I know most of us who are in this room are here all the time, but what do you guys think works best to schedule meetings or to do that in a long-term fashion? Because it seems like what we're doing right now works, but it doesn't really work.
Well, if we schedule a monthly meeting of the council, and then each region is going to book their own fact-finding, social type aspect to it, the standard when the third or fourth Wednesday or Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Okay. The Tuesday, the third or fourth Tuesday of the month, then why don't we leave that as affirmed as far as that's when the meeting's gonna happen, then the socials that will happen each month, that's gonna have to be kind of at the will of the people that are planning it, and what we can get with a limited budget, we're trying to get people to say, make things available, donations in kind, those types of things, so we have to have a little bit of flexibility as it pertains to the socials.
Yeah.
So executive summary, case by case, but third or fourth Tuesday?
Yeah.
Yeah, that works for everyone? And then what we'll do is send a doodle poll. Is that what we used last time?
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone got that or not, but do a doodle poll.
So why would we not just have third Tuesday?
Do you want to,
period?
I mean, that's, if that works for
I
everyone.
think the biggest thing is having
No, this is
a plan in
important.
advance.
This is
I have a regular recurring meeting on the 3rd. I think we owe it to the people who are not able to make it tonight to
To
open
put
it
it
to the
to 'em.
group.
Right.
And definitely not the third Tuesday, because I have a different regular recurring meeting on the third Tuesday.
But should we do a poll?
Well,
for-
now that I know that, we're definitely
Don't you want my voice here?
Could we possibly, by using the doodle poll and see what everyone's availability is, but maybe do it quarterly, so for a quarter, it's the same, so it's the third Tuesday, and then we switch, so that way, people that can't make it, no.
It makes
No,
it
it's
really
supposed to be
hard.
the
People will
same
make
day.
it work if,
Yeah, I have a lot of sticky notes. I don't know if I can handle that many more. But
Why
that's
don't we
great,
just,
so.
we'll set up a
Yeah.
generalized doodle poll,
And then we'll go from
and
there.
then have people put in what their preference on a date, and then whatever the majority is, we'll just go with it,
Sure, let's do that.
and it'll be standing.
Do you want someone else to do that?
It works fine for me.
If anyone would like to,
I mean,
If
might
you
be-
off- if you offer-
I'm not a doodle
Okay.
person, but
I can doodle it.
I
You
sense
mind?
that, I sense that. you
I can
would-
send you an updated sheet to the people. Sweet, so you'll do that. Let's go real quick to goals, guys. I think we have like half an hour left, plus or minus a couple minutes. I know we're all kind of fading, but, so let's talk goals. Let's talk, short-term, midterm, and long-term. When I wrote this, my thought was long-term is beyond September 1st. Long-term is, we're assuming that this is going to be around for 2 years from now, 3 years from now, to, for at least another governor's term, let's put it that way. Midterm, I think, is shortly after that, is maybe 2019, or right after the report. Okay, what do we want to, where does the short term is where does it put us till September 1? And then midterm is from there on, next couple months after that, beginning of the next year. What are our goals for that? I think that makes sense from a timeline perspective, just considering what we work with from a framework. And we'll scribble everything down.
I mean, I'd say short term is definitely setting up the logistics to make this group high functioning. So bylaws, set meeting time, election of officers, those kinds of things. And then I would say for short term, we should consider putting something in like execute our first event off-site from this general meeting.
anything to add to that? Short term. I mean, I definitely think the report needs to be in that. Not to be too obvious, I guess.
Well, and I would even add to that, like solicit some feedback from our previous, draft, and not only from this office, but also from our communities.
Issue experts, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know, do you guys ever reach out to housing? You were trying to reach out to people?
I've had some offline conversations with them, yeah, and they're interested in either, coming and doing a panel thing. They can come here.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah.
No. You bring up a good point, and I forgot to mention it earlier. I think our short-term goal is to have, build on our reports from last time and build on the group's work. You know what I mean? Because I think that needs to go in the bylaws as well. And I really think we really hit it on the nail for the most part with our groups last time around. I think there's a couple issues that don't squarely fall in one or the other, and that's a little complicated, but we'll figure it out. But for the most part, I think that needs to be solidified. And I think that, I guess the short-term goal is to make meaningful progress on our action steps. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but I think that's certainly the right direction to some degree for us to go. You know what I mean? You've had housing just because it's something I naturally gravitate towards. You had I thought, interesting ideas with terms of zoning. And there's some other things I think that goes on in the legislature that would square with the housing section. And so I think that the meaningful action or the meaningful steps on the action items, I think needs to be part of it, because I think we need to show progress. I think we need to, for one, show growth, meaning we're engaging more people and we're having the discussions, we're having groups like Stay, Work, Play, or New Futures come in and speak to us, or I know, I don't know if you guys know who this is, but Commissioner Caswell, he's the Commissioner of Business and Economic Affairs. He's been proverbially blowing up my inbox, trying to come here. Taylor's a great guy. I'm very happy that he wants to come. But I think that's part of it. And I think that's two things that need to go in there as well.
It forces us to stay actionable in our reports as well, and actually focus on things that we can do something with, which I think is also important.
Yeah, let's it's up in point 4. The report serves as a summary of the council's activities during the year, as well as a list of recommendations submitted during the year.
Yep. On action items. Sorry, I'm writing and trying to figure out what we do next here. Okay. Do we want to move on to midterm? Are we there yet? Or do we want to talk about short term a little bit more? Midterm? And we can always revisit these. I think that's going to happen very clearly. And I think going forward, what I'd like to see is us coming to a point where we say, okay, environment, conservation, transportation committee, okay, where are you at? Like, who have you talked to? What have you developed issues, or have you seen that because of feedback this might have been misguided, for lack of a better term, or not the correct direction, or this was spot on in terms of issues, and having some kind of feedback. Because I think these meetings are going to develop to being less of a substantive conversation of individual groups and more of a general conversation of, this one particular topic that someone else comes in and talks about. I guess that's a short-term goal. Midterm? Where do we want to be in, say, September 2 of this year? Or January 1st of 2019?
We want to be able to work.
Maybe January 2nd, but.
Working actively with legislators and the governor to implement some of the changes that we named in our short-term goals.
Okay.
And then that would follow through to the long-term goal of the continuation of the council. So if we, on a short-term goal, we come up with items that are constantly being re-looked at in the report, and then we're able to work with legislators and the governor about the implementation and the effects on the millennial generation will be able to suffice the continuation of the council as we start phasing ourselves out and new people start coming in.
I wonder, I'm just wondering if, you know, in that midterm, we're gonna end up focusing on one issue or another, more concentrating on one thing or another, because like, to implement and to make change, sometimes like we'll need to,
Well, each
either
committee-
one group or as a committee,
Yeah,
all
'cause-
work together to do that.
Well, if we each have a committee that we're working on, and we can interchange between the committees that we want to, correct?
Yeah.
So if each committee has their own items listed in the report, then one of the ideas that we had last time was, all right, well, if we look through Legiscan, we see current legislation that's going through, and then we have workforce development, look at these ones, environment, look at these ones, what we're gonna be able to do is each as a committee, we'll be able to work on it, see how we'll be able to, you know, implement an idea as far as how we'll be able to work with people on it, and then at the meetings, we come together as a committee to talk about it amongst the group. Does that answer?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I just think that maybe just more concentration will be during that time is what I'm trying to say.
And, you know, I don't foresee any subgroup, for lack of a better term, going by the wayside and sort of finishing its work, because I don't think any policy area is ever going to dry out on issues, but
Right.
I certainly maybe foresee ourselves having more an ebb and flow in some groups, where some groups have a bigger workload than others, and that might refocus some people's attention on issues.
And that's, I think, what I'm talking about. Like, I just have that expectation that things are gonna float to the top.
Yeah.
I think, I'm not sure if it fits into our midterm or long-term, but at some point I'd like to see our council take a hard look at where our gaps are and who's not sitting at the table, and making sure that we're inviting those people. You know, lots of my thoughts sometimes around millennials and healthcare, like we don't have that kind of person sitting here, and should we, and how do we engage that and not overload ourselves with, you know, we already have 4 communities that people are engaged on, but just recognizing in the either mid or long term that there are existing gaps, and should we be addressing them?
So here's my question. To me, that's a midterm, because right now we're sort of, we have our foundational report, for lack of a better term. I say it a lot today. We have our foundational report. We're at midterm, we're basically 2 reports in. You know, I think that's a great time to have self-evaluation and say, this is where we're at, this is where we're good at. We're doing this to some degree here, but I think we're at the beginning of the deep dive. And I think it's not healthy to quite go there yet, but certainly, what is it, 5 months from now? No, it's longer than that, whatever. I think
September.
7 months?
I thought we were talking about January.
Well, a little bit of everything in that period.
Either way, in that mid or long,
That
I
quarter,
think
yeah. Self-review.
a good check-in.
So, long-term. What's the long-term goal?
Impact.
And if we could maybe not paraphrase the executive order, that'd be nice.
Yeah, I mean,
Even though I, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think we want to, like he's saying, impact and just like have built a report, right, with all the groups that we think are stakeholders in the state. And a lot of names have come up here and there, but whether we're being like a liaison between them and, you know, the governor's office, or they can rely on us, and when we show up to the door and are asking for information, they're not like, oh, hey, who are these guys? Like, you know, just be established and be an actual body that functions, and something that people recognize as, you know, a legitimate thing. I think that's going to be important.
And even potentially
Longevity of it as well.
Right.
serving as a partner when appropriate on drafting legislation, or even like the next level of involvement with some of those pieces, I think. You know, being the body that people will come to when they're looking for resources in that regard.
One thing that I have thought about, and I haven't talked to the governor about this, but one of my thoughts was long-term is, we talked about last year a little bit at the beginning was, and it goes to your gaps comment, is I think we're going to get to the point where we're operating at a level where it's very convenient for us to say, okay, we have subgroups, and maybe not just subgroups of us 25, but have subgroups and the opportunity for others to partake in it without being formal members of the council, but being part of that subcommittee. Okay. Anything to add to the goals? I know it's very abstract right now. Cool. I had two quick things before we sort of wrap up. We're doing pretty good on time, I think. One was, there's a couple things I had wanted to point out that I think are interesting to us that are going on in the House and the Senate in terms of bills that just very briefly I looked at. There's one in relation to Housing Development Appeals Board that I thought was very interesting and went towards the idea of that we're having obviously very concrete issues in the state with housing in our housing stock, and I thought that was very interesting. It's if you are interested in reading, it's SB 557. I heard people refer to as simply a housing appeals board. I'm not. It's not the formal title, but I think it's a good summary of it. So I think that was very interesting to look into. I have a couple. We talked about the RET, the real estate transfer tax for first-time home buyers, so incentivizing home buying. That's SB 301, if anyone wants to look into that. That I thought was very interesting. There's one by Representative Hinch, which is 1101. It's relation to regulating groundwater pollution. I thought was very interesting. And obviously, if you're attentive to the news, groundwater and water quality and all that entire issue is obviously a huge discussion item right now in the state. I'm sure George will talk about that quite a while. And then the other one I wanted to talk about was 1104, which is regulatory reform. I know we talked a little bit about license reciprocity and sort of breaking down some of the barriers of entry in that regard. So that's just a couple that I had my eye on. The other thing I wanted to touch on is your portion with feedback from the governor, which is, so I've had several discussions with him about it. You know, we've engaged and we talked about it, and some of these ideas of, you know, bylaws and structure and how we build it are his ideas. And I'm hoping he will either come to our next meeting or will by the next meeting have a very extensive review of our annual report, which will sort of give into the details of this is really what I think squares what you're saying, what I'm doing, and here are some of the other things that I think you might want to look at. And I'm hoping that will be done by next time. That's really all I had. I don't know if anyone else had anything. The one thing I did neglect was, are there a couple people who would like to play some email tag with me or phone tag with me and try to write the bylaws?
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at all.
As if I'm not busy enough right now.
Yeah. Is it tax season or anything?
I'll take a look.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Then for next time, let's do the following. We'll have the bylaws done in a week or two. I think that's not too an ambitious goal. I think that's manageable since it's fairly condensed. We'll have that. I'll keep working on getting feedback from the governor. I think that's an very obtainable goal. He's very eager on that. And then you'll send out the doodle poll. Is there anything anyone else wants to address?
I don't know if you have anyone you can point us in the direction to, but I had gone through the Legiscan, the general counsel website. Navigating through that website is kind of like, I don't know if you guys remember LexisNexis. You know, like going through it, you kind of look at it and you're like, you know, what am I looking at? I don't know if you have any, you guys a user manual?
I mean, I can show you how to use it.
Just some guidance on it, because I know that me and Carolyn had talked about having some of this information prepared for the Manchester meeting, for the Manchester Social Cluster meeting we'll have in March.
Yeah.
So if we can end up just having a rundown, because going through all the different pieces of legislation, it's just not feasible. So if there's a way to filter it, then at least that way we can have something a little bit more as far as what's going on with the, you know, with the legislator, with the legislation.
Yes. I'll send you a contact to someone upstairs, which is where the House office is. I should explain that. Speaker's, the majority's office is upstairs.
Okay.
I'll send you someone you can talk to.
Awesome.
I'll also send you some bullets. Once you figure it out, it's easy. But figuring it out is hard. Where are we at with Manchester?
We have a date of the
We have a date of March 29th. So I think before we put together any programming, we wanted to meet tonight and find out sort of what our next steps are. So I think that we can proceed. I have talked with a few corporate partners that would be interested in participating and sponsoring, which I really don't think will be an issue. People are very eager to jump on board with millennial issues, as we all know. So maybe we can touch base on it offline and
let's talk.
sort of start figuring out the logistics.
Maybe logistically. Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah. Take care. Thanks for coming.
Take care.
How about this? Maybe for now we say that Manchester, the event, and the meeting are two separate things, just because it's a little bit of a close timeline.
Yeah.
And then we'll touch offline and hopefully get that squared within the next week so everyone can know.
But March 29th is the date that we're currently holding. For
Manchester.
what's
Yeah,
that?
for the
In
event.
for the Manchester event, yeah.
I'll be out of the country, but any way that I can be involved to like help set up, like getting things ready, leading up to it.
I'm thinking that probably the best course of action is we can put together sort of like a draft agenda of what we think the event should look like.
Yeah.
And then share it with you and you can give us some feedback. I know that you said the governor was likely to attend, or at least if possible would be to. So you could give us some insight into like how you want to be engaged at the event and that kind of thing, and then we can disseminate it throughout the group and get everyone's input on what you think.
Sounds great. Excellent. Is there anything else? No?
So we'll wait for the doodle poll to do our next meeting.
And third or fourth Tuesday.
There's silent votes here.
Yeah. So if you like what people are saying, no, it's good. Anyways, so, well, thank you everyone, and I'll talk to you soon.